I,
Right. So
I think Thomas had requested maybe a recording, so I
yeah,
tried to take notes.
I think Paul figured out how to get it out of the cloud.
well, there are many people in the world who have figured that out. None of them are sitting on this side of my device. So, but we will figure it out soon. We will become,
Okay.
yeah, I'm sure that it's not that challenging. Okay, so let's go ahead and have a prayer and we'll get started. God, we are grateful for an opportunity to have conversation together. We're grateful that our congregations have each had options before us and choices that could be made, and that the choices are exciting in themselves and also have a bit of challenge and mystery for us. So we ask that you would give us your wisdom and guidance as we have these conversations tonight, that we might ask good questions and that we might be able to receive good information, that we might share thoughts with one another so that both congregations might be able to thrive, and that all that we're doing would truly be a glory to you and a good witness for Jesus. We lift this prayer to you in his name and in the power of your Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
And so I would just catch you guys up a little bit. So we have been having a process going on in our congregation for a while, and we have decided to consolidate our ministries as using the campus on Montgomery as our home base. And we have another property across town that has just a little bit of building on it, including a sanctuary worship center and a home that has been used as office and Sunday school and that kind of stuff. So a little bit there, but there's quite a bit of land. And so in our discernment process, we realized that there's a good opportunity to develop low income housing, and a lot of the congregation was very supportive of that. So we have been talking to several different groups that have developers and the way they operate. And so we talked with Mary Maga last week and about Christian church homes and her experience with them. And then we had heard Burbank. We talked with people from Burbank and they said, do you know the people at Napa? And so we said, we do, and checked in with y'all. And so here we are to hear what your experience is like. Tell us a little bit about your project and what your experience has been like with Burbank. And then the people from what we call our 3.0 group, because this is the third generation, the third generation of this discernment team. And so our 3.0 group members who are here will have questions that they will ask to follow up on what we're learning from you and the type of information that you've been able to share. So if you would start by just telling us a little bit about your project and how it came to be and how you came to be working with Burbank and your experience with them.
Yeah, maybe I'll start in and let Mary Lee and Ken add if I've left anything out. But in about 2018, I was asked by the leadership of the church here to bring a small group of the congregation, kind of representing our entire congregation from a demographic standpoint, to the table to discuss a particular building on our campus. We have a large room that at once it was built as a hall with a stage and a commercial kitchen. It was a space, that was meant for all church gatherings and for youth activities that had classrooms attached, etc. We, as a congregation, made the decision about 25 years ago to donate that to the city and county of Napa for about $1 a year, for them to run what was called the Hope Center. At the time, of the Hope Center's inception, we had a overnight shelter that was located just kitty corner to the location of the Hope Center. And so it was a natural spot for the church to get involved with the community and say, folks don't have a place to go when they get out of the shelter. You know, they leave the shelter at, I don't know, 7 a.m. or whatever it was. And, you know, they didn't have any place to go. So we provided the Hope Center and donated that. As a part of that process, the building got turned into a place where folks could do laundry, they could take showers, and there were other private nonprofits and government agencies that had office hours, and so folks were receiving services from the community in that space. In about 2017 or so, we ended up getting the building back from the community, largely because the shelter situation in Napa had changed, moved to the south part of Napa. A new shelter was built, and the services that were being provided at the Hope Center were moved more in conjunction with that facility. So I was tasked by the congregation leadership to bring this group together to say, you know, what's the next thing for Adams Hall? What do we do with Adams Hall now that we have it back? The stark reality when we go into that space is that it's been altered so significantly that it would require some you know, pretty specific and large scale infrastructure upgrades and replacements and maintenance and that kind of thing. Even if we spent the money that it takes to put that building into the shape where we would have a building back that we would want to use and be proud of, it would take an inordinate amount of money, and it might not be the space that we really need and want for the future. It didn't take us long to realize that we probably needed to go up a few thousand feet and take a look at the whole campus that we have. We own a whole city block in the downtown Napa area, which is a particular luxury in this day and age, and we don't take that lightly. It was a gift from the founder of the city of Napa, Nathan Coombs, back in 1850. He gave it to the Methodist Church to establish the first, and we probably are the oldest church in the county of Napa. As we began to talk about it and look at other facilities, we have another building that's kind of adjacent to it called the Bonner Education Building that was built in the early 50s during the height of the kind of baby boom after World War II, and it was essentially to house a very thriving church ministry and Sunday school program, and it really was an educational program or educational building that had classrooms serving K through 12. As we've come to realize that you know, a different demographic in our community, we looked at those two structures and said, even if we spent again, Bonner Education Building, even if we spent the money to make it to today's standards, it wouldn't be the kind of spaces that we need, and we end up with a 75-year-old building that is, you know, less than our needs. And looking at the future, we said, well, then what does that mean for us, right? We've got two buildings on our campus, you know, one that I was asked. We went to church council and to board of trustees and said, we'd like to expand our, you know, our evaluation to include the whole campus, but recognizing that after the earthquake in 2014, we did a significant retrofit and rebuild of our sanctuary building and fellowship hall that's attached to it. and we wouldn't be looking at doing anything with those facilities. So we really were looking at the balance of the property. You know, we went through a similar kind of evaluation, Jeanette, as it sounds like you have, and that is, you know, are we crazy? Is this nuts? Should we be thinking about this at all? And the reality was, we didn't know, but none of us are housing experts. But what we did was we invited some people to come in. Sounds like same thing that you've done, and talk to them and to get their perspective. To a person that we talked to, and I think what Mary Lee, we had about 4 or 5 different entities that came. Christian Church Homes was one, Burbank, of course, was one. Napa Valley Community Housing, which is our local private nonprofit that builds and maintains housing, was one, and there may have been a couple others, and we had this conversation with them, and to a person they said, not only are you not nuts, but if you get to the point where you want to do something, we'd love to be involved, right? So keep us in the loop. So and we called ourselves the Dream Team. Why not? I mean, you know, seemed like a good a good moniker for us. We were certainly dreaming at that point. There were a lot of ideas that came out about what we should and could do in the downtown area. Probably not unlike Santa Rosa, one of the largest needs in our community is housing for people who work in our community and can't afford to live here. And it continues to be one of the things that, you know, is really significant across the board. And as a local church, we felt compelled to try and look at what the community was dealing with in terms of its greatest needs and figure out if there was a spot for us there. I might, you know, just sidebar for a second to let you know that in the late 70s, early 80s, our church stepped out in faith and worked to create, at that time, senior housing was a significant issue. And we created a senior housing project that is still in existence, 83 units of senior housing that has been built, housed, well maintained, you know, the whole thing. A significant, in fact, a majority of the members of the board who control that property are members of our church. And so we have some history in the community in stepping into those places where we see a community need and trying to figure out a way that we might, you know, help fill that need. So back to our project as the Dream Team leader, and just let me tell you that my career was in agriculture. I served as the County of Napa's agricultural commissioner for 20 years. So housing, you know, I don't have a background in housing. All of this is kind of new, and we're all we were and still are kind of learning as we go. But I thought, okay, knowing what I know, it seems like the next best thing for us to do would be to draft a request for proposal, thinking that we would go back to the housing development community and ask them to tell us what they would do on this site if they had access. At about the point that our and in the process of making the decision for us to kind of go towards housing, we changed our name from the Dream Team to the Transformation Team. Also, you know, a good moniker for what we're talking about doing here. So we took the request for proposal, the RFP that I wrote, and I think, Jeanette, I told you that, you know, how I got to that document. I thought I need to try and find a document for an RFP that was drafted for California. And I thought you know, where would I go to look for something like that? Well, it turns out that the city of Monterey had 4 parcels that they were interested in having some affordable housing built upon those parcels, and they put out an RFP for those 4 parcels. And my logic was, it's in California, it's an upscale community, they probably have a good city attorney and a good planning staff, and you know, maybe the quality of their document would be, you know, similarly appropriate. So I took that document and I redrafted it to fit our needs. And about at that point, I had known, because I was chair of church council at the time that our church went through the 2014 earthquake, and during the retrofit and rebuild program, we had to work directly with the district committee on church location and building. So I already had a relationship with that committee, understood its function, and knew that, you know, in order for us to do anything, we really needed to seek their advice and counsel. So I asked, you know, Peter, the chair of that committee, to place, you know, I sent him a copy. I was keeping him in the loop, as well as our district superintendent, Shinya Goto, in the loop. And Shinya was supportive, Peter was supportive, and they took it to the committee. And the committee turned out to be, you know, supportive of the concept, but they said, we think you don't have the right document. Requests for proposals take an inordinate amount of time, energy, money for a developer to put together. They bring that to you having done all this work, and you kind of are in a situation where you either say yes or no. And they suggested, and it was wise counsel in my mind, they suggested that we back up a step and that we look at creating the request for qualification. The request for qualifications gives you background and understanding of the companies you're dealing with, their relative ability to do something, a project of this size and nature. Gives you they outline who their staff would be, who they would be using as architects and builders, and some of those really key functions, and you get an opportunity to evaluate those individuals and their, you know, their level of competence, etc. So I went back to the computer and took the RFP, and in my infinite wisdom about housing, I recrafted the RFP into a request for qualifications that I ended up sending back to the after, you know, our discussion at our local transformation team. And by the way, we went through the process with both church council and board of trustees at the local church to ensure that they were on board and believed that this was the right direction. So we had the appropriate kind of sign off on both the infrastructure and the ministry sides of this. And we sent the RFQ to the district committee on church location and building. They scheduled a meeting and unanimously approved the concept and sending out the document, and for us to negotiate with, you know, go through a process to discern who might be a good partner, if any. And if we got to somebody we felt was a good partner, that, you know, they gave us the authority to negotiate with that company in good faith, and then come back to them before we have, you know, decided to make any kind of final determinations and whatnot. So I worked with the transformation team, and we evaluated the responses that we got back from the request for qualification. And I really think we hit a sweet spot. And I say that we're in the midst of the process right now, but in Napa County, Burbank Housing has a very good reputation for being able, and they've done several projects here that have been, applauded by the local community, for not only the way that they build, but the way that they interact with the community when they do so. So they have support here, and they're very adept at building. They partnered with our local private nonprofit, the Napa Valley Community Housing Organization, who also have built. They're not as adept at building, but they're far better at managing and maintaining facilities once built. So with Burbank to build and Napa Valley Community Housing to manage and to maintain, I really think we've got the best of both worlds here in the process that we've done. And so what we did was we negotiated what's called an exclusive negotiation agreement. Also ran that through the district committee so that they were well aware of what we're doing. I've always looked at this as a partnership with us and the district and the church conference. I would much prefer that we, feel as if they're standing with us rather than, trying to figure out what we're doing, and that we have their support. And in fact, the district committee on church location and building has been unanimously in support of our process, as have the bishop and council. And so I feel good about that. We're beginning to talk with the congregation in a little bit more in depth about what we are doing and about what this might mean for our campus. And we're beginning to roll some of that information out as the transformation team is in the process right now of working with Burbank and Napa Valley Community Housing on the plan for how we develop the space and what spaces are dedicated to housing, what spaces are dedicated to the church, and how that whole thing is structured. We have not got into the finance plan or any of those kinds of details that we'll have to work through. Our plan at this point is for a long-term lease for the property, so we're not giving up the ownership of the property. We're using the property's value in downtown Napa as the thing that gets this built. At the end of whatever the length of period for the lease is, it will probably be at least 55 years, if not 75 years or 90. We're not even sure. But at the end of that process, the church gets the property back, and whatever buildings and amenities have been added to it become our property at that point. And so we know that we've got to do some due diligence to ensure that folks at the end of this process don't end up with a turnip that they've got to try and figure out what to do with, but that, it's maintained well and maybe they still have an asset at that period of time. All of that's to be determined. But maybe that gives you a thumbnail of kind of where we've been, what kind of process we've taken, and where we are today. And I would ask Mary Lee and Ken if they had anything to add, and then be happy to answer questions.
I think you did a really thorough job, Dave, of talking about where we've been.
And I would agree with that. Dave, why don't you say a little bit about what it's been like to work with Burbank, the couple of larger meetings that we've had, and because I just find them to be amazingly supportive of the values of the church and the mission of the church, and willing to do things that will make us look good.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I think you're absolutely right. And I didn't really go into that. I think I mentioned to you that I think we're fortunate to have Burbank and Napa Valley Community Housing as our partners in this. I particularly feel fortunate in that um, in my professional career, I worked with the CEO of Burbank Housing, Larry Florin, who at the time was Director of Housing and Intergovernmental Affairs for the County of Napa. So Larry and I are friends, we're buddies. I mean, it's an amazing thing for me in this stage of my life to be able to work with a friend like that. So, I try not to be to allow that to interfere with the business side of this thing, because that this is business. But at the same time, I feel very comfortable working with Larry. And Ken's right. They have brought a team together, in particular their architect and their architect's team, who's out of Moran. His name is Rick Williams, and Rick has worked with churches in the past to develop housing, and so he understands the nuances and the importance of kinds of amenities that that are important to us. And as we bring things up, he gets excited. I'll give you an example. We have on our church campus today, we have a labyrinth, which is it's semi-open to the public, I would say. It's behind the lock gate, and so if you want to walk the labyrinth, you can, but you've got to go through a process to get back there and to be able to do it. He suggested, and it happens to be in a place that we would be knocking stuff down in that area and rebuilding over it. He suggested, oh, and I failed to tell you that on the side of our property, church-owned property, there's a city park. It's called Triangle Park, and it's a passive park at the moment. Well, I went by today, and it looked like it was largely unmowed weeds. But we would, as a part of this process, I've brought the city council members over individually and walked them around the property and suggested to them that we would love to partner with them on, what we're planning to do on this block. And to a person, they believe that that's a really great idea and they'd love to partner with us and all that kind of stuff. Well, we still have to work that out, but that's kind of part of our plan. What Rick has suggested that we do is if we're going to move this labyrinth, we move it over to the park as a part of the amenity for not only folks who are going to live in this new community we're going to create, but for the larger neighborhood itself and for the church, and the public gain greater access to the labyrinth that's kind of a part of our project. It's one of the things that I think points to the sensitivity that he has to the things that we've done, and he's looking at climbing walls for the kids who are going to live here. He's looking at raised beds for gardens so that people who live in these homes will have a place to grow vegetables. He's looking at artwork, and we even put together a art subcommittee and looked within our congregation at who we have that are artists that we might be able to tap into their artistry and their understanding and bring some local art to the project in in some way, shape, or form. I just feel like they have been very sensitive to us as a church. They understand, and they, so far, I just feel like we've selected the right partner. I feel very confident at this point, and I think everybody on our team has as well. And there hasn't been any indication that we're not going to do something really incredible here, and in conjunction with the partners that we've chosen. But I understand wholeheartedly that you've got to do your due diligence and feel that same, get to that same place of comfort. Other questions?
I have a question. You say the church owns an entire city block. And so there's the church building, and then you said there was another building. And then is this building that you're talking about going to be torn down then?
So we have three main, it's a great question. Sorry for the confusion. We have three main buildings on our property, the sanctuary, which was built originally in the 1850s, burned down and was rebuilt. The current sanctuary structure was built in 1917, and it is the facility that was rebuilt and retrofitted for earthquake after the 2014 quake.
Okay.
And it won't be touched. The fellowship hall that's attached to it, which includes a church parlor, a fellowship hall meeting type space, a kitchen of the church library, and the office complex also will not be affected by whatever we do. We have two other buildings that have been built on the property in the early 1950s. Those are Adams Hall and the Bonner Education Building. The plan at this point would be to demolish both of those buildings and to replace in the spaces that we're talking about, as well as part of a garden chapel that gets infrequent use. The buildings that would be some church spaces. So we're interested. One of the things we heard pretty clearly from the congregation in doing our analysis was they would really like to have a large meeting room with a commercial type kitchen where we could hold an all church event and an all church potluck and not be, squeezed into a smaller space to be able to do that. A space for youth activities and maybe even volleyball or, something like that. Although ceiling height becomes an issue when you talk about sports inside. But what we're talking about doing is creating spaces instead of the buildings that are there currently. We'd be knocking those down. And I must say, I was talking to my wife. My father was the chair of the board of trustees when both of those buildings were built and were, I guess you'd say, christened for use in the church. And so the first stop that I made was to my sisters, who still live here in Napa, and said, "Hey, I just want to let you know, because people get attached. There's the sentimentality about some of that, and knocking down buildings that people are attached to, where they went to Sunday school or they went to youth group or whatever. That becomes a big deal, and you've got to take into account all of those sensitivities."
So I guess my question is that we have a large parcel that we're speaking about. It's acres.
Yeah.
And
I
it
went
has been,
online. I went online and looked, and you've got a great spot.
so my question is that our acreage is all one lot. And if
Mhm.
we were to do this, we would have to divide it if we wanted to lease it. I mean, this is all still in, talking stages.
Sure.
Are you subdividing your lot so that the lease is where the buildings are going to be built, or is it still, how are you handling that?
Yeah, right now the Burbank is doing the due diligence on the site. There are currently two parcels. We're essentially talking about
Okay.
all of one parcel and a piece of another, but that would be determined as a part of the lease. We would make, determinations about, and we're having surveyors come in and kind of evaluate
Okay.
where things are. Yeah, you've got to take all of that into account for sure.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to, do all of this in a way that, you don't want to find yourself 15, 20 years down the road and go, wait a minute, this isn't right. We've got the wrong pieces or the wrong parcels or whatever.
Right.
You know, if you've got a large lot and the city will let you subdivide it, that's probably the smartest way to go is to work with the city to, you know, to do the zoning and to create the parcels that you want and then designate those parcels or parts of parcels or whatever. And but at the end of the day, I wouldn't let the zoning issue stop you. I mean, one of the reasons that you get into a relationship with somebody like Burbank is that they've got an awful lot of tools, they know how to use them. And as long as you're doing your due diligence to evaluate, you know, how they're handling their side of the game, and you know, I would say there's a piece of trust that goes on, but this is business and this is my church, right? So I've got a good attorney. You know, if you don't already have a good land use attorney who's a part of your congregation, or you have a relationship with a good land use attorney, one of the suggestions that I would think it would be in the best interest of the church is to seek that out. We've got a person over here that I completely trust, and we're, you know, and we're using that individual to protect our interests.
Okay. My other question is just out of curiosity, because you said California Christian Homes came.
Uh-huh.
Why did you not pick them as opposed to Burbank?
Yeah, I think California Christian Homes is a great organization. They have a tendency to focus on senior housing. And the reason we didn't go with them was largely because they were focused on building more senior units. And, you know, I don't doubt that we could use more senior units in Napa, but it doesn't rise to, at this point, it doesn't rise to the level that workforce housing does in terms of we've got a unified school district that's in declining enrollment. Why? Because families can't afford to live here. So they're living in Sonoma County or Solano County or, you know, wherever, and they're commuting to work in our community. We begin to lose the diversity. We begin to lose the fabric of our community by not allowing those folks to live among us. So what we're trying to do is create an opportunity for folks who already work here first, and then perhaps folks who want to work, you know, who work here, maybe don't work here yet, but would like to. I mean, we're trying to figure out how to reduce carbon footprint. This whole thing has implications that are societal, environmental. You know, we're charged with taking care of God's world, right? So, I mean, this is a piece of doing all of that.
Okay, thank you.
And we kind of have all of those issues built into, you know, one of the things that we're talking about doing is, you know, how could the church be, if we're going to have a you know, group of homes on our property, how could the church be in ministry to the folks who live there? What kind of services would benefit their lives? And Napa Valley Community Housing happens to be an excellent organization at doing that already with a number of different locations. But, you know, we would work with them to determine the needs of the community first, and then figure out how we could, you know, plug people from our congregation. You know, maybe it's after school mentors or help with homework, or, you know, it's English as a second language, or it's reading to kids, or, you know, I mean, you know, the list goes on in terms of opportunities for the church to be involved. I have been a lifetime Methodist. As I like to tell people, I was carried into the First United Methodist Church in Napa at 2 weeks old against my will. And, you know, I have witnessed, and I think most recently the annual conference has witnessed churches who, you know, we're seeing churches close. It's not just the ideological differences that are splitting us, it's also the ability for us to maintain, you know, these churches in our communities. And I look at it from the standpoint of you know, we've got to step out here in bold faith and demonstrate to the community who we are. And I think that's the way that we attract people in the door. They say, gosh, you know, did you hear about what the Methodists are doing? I want to be a part of that. And we end up seeing people walking through our doors because they want to be a part of what we're doing. If you build it, they will come, kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
I'm interested in the process that you described briefly, the request for qualification. How long ago was that done? But after the committee said, here's what we think you ought to do. How long ago was that?
I'm going to say about 8 months ago, but I could probably give you
Oh, good.
you
No,
know,
that's good. And so at the end of that process, after you received the information from that request, did you feel like you kind of knew whether any of those people were the ones? I mean,
well, that's a good question. Excuse me, I've got some sunlight that's, you know, bothering me. I'm gonna see if I can't. Apologize for that. I think I'll say that I'm hopeful that that we would have the kind of response we did. I think, you know, my suggestion would be to cast a broad net, as broad a net as you can. I mentioned to Jeanette in an email that, you know, you may want to touch base if you haven't already with Generation Housing over there, Gen Close.
Mm.
And
we have.
And good,
Yeah.
An excellent organization. I joined Generation Housing. I sent them a little bit of money because I believe in what they're doing. They have done a tremendous job, and I think that they probably have a list of folks. If you were interested in knowing who to send an RFQ to in Sonoma County, they could probably give you that list. And so send it broad and wide, and you know, get a response from as many people as you can, and then have a good process to go through them. I'd be happy. I think in one of the I sent both documents to you, didn't I, Jeanette?
Yes.
So I think in one or the other, or maybe even both, there's a process articulated as to how we would judge, you know, what we get back. And I think it's a matter of you know, evaluating that, and, you know, getting the responses back. If you can, get them to come in and talk with you and bring visuals and you know, share their perspective with you, and get a, you know, I'm going to sound like a broken record. It's about relationships. It really is. It's all about relationships. And if you feel comfortable with the people that you're interviewing, and you feel like these are folks that get it and understand kind of what you're in, and you feel like you could have a good relationship with them, I think that's probably one of the most important things. And I would suggest to you that that's one of the things that if we were to poll the transformation team in Napa right now, they'd say these folks are great because they get us, and the relationships are what's important.
Yeah.
So
I-
did the go ahead.
I was going to say, we did send out the the RFQ to what, 7 was it, Dave? 7
Yeah.
different entities, and got responses from 3, 2 of which was a common response, and those are the ones we want. So as we read the responses, I think the whole committee thought, oh, this combination Burbank, Napa, Napa County Housing, I always say it wrong. But anyway, that the two that banded together, we felt that they were the best ones. And we were kind of saying, oh, let's go with them. But then we got to thinking we could have a lot to learn from interviewing anybody who sent in a proposal. And I thought it was a very, very helpful and insightful in-person meeting that we had, or on a Zoom meeting that we had with the other folks that sent something in. And it helped, at least from my point of view, it helped me to understand even better why Burbank and Napa Valley Housing were the people that we wanted to work with.
Good point.
So the request for qualifications served the purpose of the RFP. And is that?
Well, what it did was it gave us the ability to look at their relative qualifications to perform what we wanted them to be able to do.
Right.
And we could check references and do all of that. The other thing, I think the wisdom of the church location and building committee was that, if you get an RFP, you get the proposal, and as I mentioned earlier, at great expense and time and energy and effort. And folks are probably reluctant at that point to want to do anything different. Okay. We've done our due diligence on your site, and here's what we think you ought to do. And it's kind of like, take it or leave it. But the wisdom of the district committee on church location and building was, ask for an RFQ, develop, figure out who you think you could work with, and then where we are is we're in a process to design this thing together. So at the end of the day, we're not taking somebody else's design that they've worked on and brought to us. They're bringing some initial, design ideas and criteria, and we're saying, gosh, we really like this, but we don't like that. Or how about if we did this or we did that? One of the things that, and all of us who are in this kind of game of trying to figure out if we could do housing have to think about, okay, what are the local and political ramifications of doing something like this? Well, the big issue for housing in general has been and always will be parking, because we live in a society where everybody needs to have a vehicle. Well, if your site, and I didn't look at your site that you're talking about and how close it is to transportation hubs, but if it's at all close to any place where you've got transportation hubs, you can get a reduction in the number of parking spaces that you have to allocate because you're close to public transit. The other thing that's happening, and I think we all have to pay attention to some of this, even though it's like my least favorite thing to do, is to look at what the state legislature is doing in terms of their activity to allow developers rights and opportunities that they've never had before. And right now we're in the midst of a situation where, depending on how projects are being designed and brought forward, there are ways for developers to say, here's what we're going to do, and the local jurisdictions, the cities in our cases, have very little to say about it. I'm not suggesting that won't really piss off some of your local elected officials. It will. And I think we're beginning to better understand how all of those laws are going to play out, and what developers are going to try and do. We happen to find ourselves in a situation, so you have to analyze this for yourself. We happen to find ourselves in the middle of downtown Napa in economic opportunity zone. We all already get some reductions in parking as a result of that. We're very close to the downtown core, so there's opportunities for people to walk to work. We're close to County of Napa buildings. We're close to City of Napa buildings. So people who work in, for the local government could live here and could walk to work literally just a couple blocks. There's those kinds of opportunities. And so we're still planning for parking. And I'm going to encourage us to not do anything that's going to make adversaries of our local elected officials. But at the same time, there are those things that are available to developers, and depending on who you choose, they might say, well, we get the site and we're gonna design it like this, and we're gonna shove it down their throat because we can. And you need to have the right partnership with the right entities to say, hey, wait a minute, that's not how we work. That's not who we want to be in the community, that kind of thing. Depending on who, how you want to be seen and all of that. My interest is for everybody to love each other at the end of this process. Good question.
Again,
Yeah.
are you headed then towards a certain percentage of the units being low-income housing, affordable housing? It sounds like some of the prospective residents will not be low income.
It's a great question. In our case, and I think all of this again depends on your community and what the numbers represent. It's clear to me that you can't develop affordable housing without the subsidies of government. Having said that, I'm sure Burbank will look to the City of Napa, the County of Napa, the State of California, and the federal government for grants to try and make this happen. It will be determined by those grants and by the subsidies that we get from government, because they will dictate the percentage of units that have to be a certain percentage of median income for the area. The positions that we're looking, when we talk about workforce housing, we're talking about teachers, we're talking about nurses, we're talking about police officers, we're talking about people who work for the fire department. We're talking about the folks that are key and integral to our community who can't afford to live here, for crying out loud, right? So will we have some folks of lower income? Perhaps, depending on the funding source and what the criteria are. Another good reason for choosing a good partner. Burbank has demonstrated time and again their ability to put together, well, I'll give you an example. There's a housing development that they're involved in over here in Napa, in the City of Napa, that it took 13 separate funding sources in order to put the deal together. 13. They've demonstrated time and again their ability to do that, to figure out how to bring these various different types together and then make them work within the context of the development that they're building. So I have good confidence that they're going to be able to do that in this case. If they can't, we'll find that out. That's part of this 2-year process that we're in, called, this exclusive negotiation agreement. We give ourselves 24 months to work with them towards, ultimately, we hope, and I think Burbank hopes, that it will be a contract with us for the lease and the build. But if it turns out that it isn't, you know, we figured that out and we part company before we spend a whole, you know, a lot of money without needing to. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of this is very site specific. So you have to really look at your particular site where it's located. You have to, you know, and one of the things that they will do is they'll do their due diligence. They're in the process of doing that right now here in Napa at our facility. They're going to do some core drilling samples this week. They've already come out with a survey team and shot some lines and figuring all some of that out. We're going through an environmental analysis where they're trying to figure out if we ever had a underground tank for fuel oil, you know, for heating oil, that kind of thing. You know, so there's a lot that goes into this thing once you get started, but it's, you know, it's, you got to look at the end game.
Are they assuming all of the financial liability for all this work they're doing?
Yeah, yeah. What our congregation has been very clear to us, and understandably so. We took on some debt when we rebuilt the sanctuary, and we paid the loan off early. It was a great campaign. The church was very generous, but it's been very clear to us that the church does not want to go into debt on what we're doing here. So I have made a commitment that we're not going to spend any of our own money on this thing, and I'm trying really hard. So to the extent, I mean, I'm not looking for accolades here. My wife and I donated to the church. We put it in a designated fund for the transformation team. And if we have bills that come from the local attorney, as an example, right, that are representing our best interest, I'm going to pay him out of that account. If anybody wants to argue with me about spending my own money on that, I'll let them. But so I'm trying very, very hard to keep this out of the church budget. Ultimately, we see this as it's going to be a long-term lease of the property, not a sale. So we're talking about a 55 to 75, maybe even longer. I don't know. I mean, that will come up in the discussions we have with Burbank about their funding plan, what the terms of the lease would be. And at the end of the day, what we'd be looking at is, the church getting the property back. But we're using that church property as the thing that gets this done. And, I was talking with Jeanette a little bit, and, I would even though this isn't like front and center in our RFQ, I think it's in there someplace, but I said something about, it'd be nice if we could get a little bit of income from this that would help the church budget. I would like to see us, be able to have budgets that, demonstrate what we want to do, what we would like to do in terms of ministry in the community. And if we were able to receive a little bit of income from the lease of this property, that would be a great thing. My bottom line is I don't want to do anything that would impact negatively our private nonprofit status, right? So we'd have to look very carefully at how that would be structured and whether the entities that we're dealing with, both Burbank and Napa Valley Community Housing, are both private nonprofits. So in the sense that we're all working together to do something here that may have some bearing, I would look to the local attorney to keep us in the on the straight and narrow in terms of that, because I don't want anything that's going to jeopardize our 501c3 status.
But it sounds like you're not anticipating a significant operational financial benefit.
That's not that's not the main reason for doing this. If it's a side benefit, we'll take it and be grateful for it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in how your committee communicates this work with the general congregation. How frequently, in what ways?
Yeah.
Do rumors go around? How is that working out for you?
Oh, you've been a part of a congregation, have you? Well, yeah, I mean, and this is much more complicated and difficult to do with a church congregation than it would be if you had an individual seller or, you know, a corporate owner of a property. You make a decision, they make a decision, and you go. In some respects, we have, and I'll also say that whoever you go with, in our case, Burbank and Napa Valley Community Housing, they haven't dealt with churches before, or not to my knowledge. And so they don't, you know, you've got to really pay attention to their game plan about communication. One of the things that I think was wise that we did as a part of our exclusive negotiation agreement with Burbank and Napa Valley Community Housing was we created a list of timelines that were dates that Burbank had to deliver certain things by a certain date. And we have the ability to give some leeway to that, but these are, you know, these are dates that I felt were important for us to have in place to be able to hold them or anyone accountable for a process. We want to move forward. And to the extent that anybody's dragging their feet, I don't want to deal with that. So we established these timelines, and if they don't meet the timeline, we have the ability, you know, to notify them that, you know, we're done. Obviously that hasn't been our experience, but one of those kind of issues, one of the items that we have a deadline on is a communication plan. So they're creating a draft communication plan. I have been in touch with them to say, look, I know that you're used to dealing with the community because you've got to do a lot of work to try and keep the NIMBY crowd at bay. But this is a little bit different in that we've got a congregation that we need to bring along. And to be honest with you, I would love to hear from them. They may have ideas that we haven't thought of. So how do we integrate them into the discussion? So I'll tell you what we've done so far. There have been numerous messages that have gone into our newsletters and, you know, giving people an idea of what's going on, trying to keep them in touch with the fact that the Dream Team is going on, Transformation Team, and et cetera. There have been several messages, many messages from the pulpit and during worship services where we have talked about the opportunities that exist for mission and for the church in what we're doing, and that and we recently put together a list of bullet point, a kind of a fact sheet that was current on the day it was written for where we are in the process and kind of where we've been, where we are, and where we think we're going. No specifics about the, you know, details of the build or the planning, but just to know that the planning is going on. And if people have interests or concerns, that'd be great. We're planning on doing another one of those. That happened, we did after the service, kind of during the coffee hour, and set up a table, and people could come over and pick up one of the sheets. They could get to know the person from Burbank who's heading up our project, ask her questions. They could pick up the fact sheet. They could ask questions of, you know, what's going on. We're probably going to do another one of those. And then our idea is to have like an open forum, almost an open house kind of situation, where we might have different stations around the room and with people at tables to be able to answer people's questions. And they could come and we're hoping to have some architectural renderings at that point. We could begin to show and get people's input on and get their response to. I have to tell you that during the discussions I had with folks after the worship service, I think it's been a couple weeks now, entirely positive, supportive. When we talk about, the fact that I think there was wisdom, and Shinya Goto, our district superintendent, was, I think, very adamant. Look, this has to have a ministry component. What I get it, and I think you're right about the importance of this, but you need to articulate, what the ministry component is. I think Mary Lee, Ken, the transformation team worked on a ministry statement that articulates that, and I think that's very helpful in these situations to help the congregation begin to see, okay, it's not just housing, which is really a basic human need, right? And many of the people who need perhaps other services and need to try and figure out other things in their life really can't begin to do that if they don't have a house, a roof over their head and kind of consistent housing. So I think when we begin to talk about all those things during worship, in the newsletters, and after the services during coffee hour. The other thing that we're doing is we're putting together a press release. The press release is going to is being drafted by Napa Valley Community Housing, Burbank, and our team. And it's going to articulate kind of to the community and begin to get that out. And I think we'll probably share that ahead of time with the congregation again, so that they have a sense that, this is moving forward. And, but like I said, when you step out in faith in a positive manner like this, it's pretty hard for people to say, I don't know that you're doing the right thing here. Well, okay, then what I would say to people, and maybe this is me because I've been involved with it since 2018, but we did a lot of discussion about these buildings. Okay, well, if we're not going to do this, then what would you propose we do? Because the buildings aren't usable right now, and they're not getting any more usable. In your situation, you have a different, kind of a completely different situation because you have some open property, you have a structure there and whatnot. You've got some, some things to do, but the reality is that, in our case, we've got these buildings that we can't afford to bring up the standards or to maintain. So if we don't do this, what would you suggest we do? There are not a lot of options. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
You said you gave a timeline basically to Burbank and Napa Valley. For them, they have to do this. Is there a timeline for the church? Because sometimes I find that, okay, you have to go to the trustees, and then you have to go to the church council, and then you have to have a all church conference, because some of this stuff is, like everybody has to vote on it, sort of a thing. And sometimes in situations at this church, we tend to put things off and, we'll do that at the next meeting, which is 2 months away. And I can see that could be very frustrating to the people that have this timeline that they're sticking to, and then the church is kind of, I don't know, dragging their feet.
I want to
Sure.
say something here because I want you to take a breath, Dave.
Thanks.
Really, I mean, gosh, you've just covered all the bases.
Yes.
I think it really helps to get the church leadership together on the same page. And I would say that we did that. Dave was very instrumental in doing that, bringing key leaders together and sharing the vision, and then going to different ministry teams to talk about what it is that we've been planning. And it's been a long time in coming. It's felt like a long time, but I think that was really, really helpful to just bring the leadership together and to share the vision. And it helps to have a Dave Whitmer, but you can't have him.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
I think, thanks, Mary Lee, for that. I think that you're absolutely right about the need to have church leadership involved. So what I've done is I've looked at the church leadership calendars, particularly for church council and for board of trustees. And the decision-making body in this is the board of trustees, right? That's who's going to make the decision about this. But you don't want to have this going on and the church council not being, in lockstep and in agreement with the direction, because this involves ministry and it's significant. It might, you said, holding an all church conference. Well, maybe, but I don't know that that's necessarily required. I mean, I think that the important thing is that you feel like the leadership of the church, with the church council and the board of trustees, are in favor of the direction you're heading, and you've got them, understanding kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it and where you're headed. And so we've done that. We're not taking this to a vote. The trustees are going to make the decision. Church council is going to make the decision about whether this makes sense for them. Board of trustees will ultimately make the legal decision about this. But it's also pretty hard for a local church to refute the leadership that's exercised by the district committee on church location and building, by the bishop and her cabinet,
Right.
and by the district superintendent. So, my suggestion would be to involve Shinya and Peter Morris and early in the process, and get them involved and make sure they understand kind of what you're doing. And so I'll tell you, walk into that discussion armed with a ministry statement. Why are you doing this? What good does this do to the, for the church ministry? Because this is church property, right? So what benefit does this hold for, for the people you're serving? Be able to articulate that and understand it. That will be helpful and be very important in your discussions with the congregation. And that's where you will get tremendous buy-in, if they begin to understand that, hey, we're going to change people's lives here, right? This is not small potatoes. This is big stuff. And when you look, I don't care where you are in this country, housing is the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And we give it lip service. We say how bad it is. We say people can't afford to live, and oh my God, and we lament it. Who's doing something about it?
Mm-hmm.
Let's be the folks who do something about that. I guarantee you, if Methodists are seen as the folks who are solving those kinds of problems in our community, we won't have enough seats in the church.
I would also say that the transformation team has really been really good about making sure that the board of church location and building and district superintendent know exactly what's going on. And I think in some ways, even more so than if we're up to me, I probably wouldn't do that. but it's been really smart, so that if there's some kind of requirement beyond the local church that needs to be fulfilled, they would say, hold on, and I mean, and I think especially an example of that would be the RFQ suggestion that they said, this is an easier way to do it, and we would go with that, and then they unanimously approved it. So it's kind of like I think that keeping them on board, they'll let us know if there's anything church-wise that needs to be done within this. So I think the churches, there's kind of like this 2-year time frame really that we want Burbank and Napa Valley Community Housing and Napa First United Methodist Church all to have completed the necessary things to get the buildings knocked down. I mean, that's kind of what start the project. All the preliminary stuff has been nailed down.
I think the other thing and so the answer to your question, Andrea, is there isn't a set schedule for doing that. I think you've got to feel your way along and say, I think this is the point where we should go to church council. Or if you don't have someone representing trustees, and in fact, so when I looked at forming our transformation team, obviously Mary Lee, our pastor, Ken, retired pastor from the Midwest, served not only churches but also on the district committee on church location and building in the conference, in the district where he served, and brought that experience. I have our chair of board of trustees, Gary Neal. I have our chair of finance, Bill Hanna. And then we have a youth member, Michelle Singh, who's, provides a perspective that, guys with my color hair need to hear. So what we've tried to do is create a small, nimble group, but with the right individuals. And then, we together say, it's about time that we go back to trustees and give them an update, or we go to church council and let's talk about what we're doing, and let's make sure that we're not going off in some direction as the leader of the band and we turn around and nobody's following. So the other thing that I guess I would suggest to you is that you think about if you have anybody in your congregation that either is a part of the I'm assuming the property that you're talking about is in the city of Santa Rosa?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
do you have any members of your congregation that are in the planning department of the city of Santa Rosa or have relationships with anybody? Does anybody on your team have relationships there? If not, make them. Go in and talk to them and start that process well ahead. I mean, Burbank and we will put together a plan for getting the entitlements for our project, and we'll work together on that. I've already laid a lot of the groundwork just because of the relationships that I have with a number of these individuals. But what was really beneficial to us was the director, I guess his title is Community Development Director. So he has planning underneath him. His name is Vin Smith, and I happen to know him really well, and we work together. So Mary Lee and I went in and sat down and talked with him, and the planning director at the time, and we said, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. Well, you know what Vin did? He had another project that he saw that was happening. There was another group of developers that were planning another project in the city of Napa, and the city council were going to require them to do something about housing. And so he said to them, well, do you want to pay money into the housing fund? And what they do is they calculate a square footage for whatever the development is,
Yeah.
and they charge them a fee per square foot, and that goes into the housing fund, and it's controlled by the city council, and they decide how it gets spent. Or do you want to, work on building some housing? And they said, well, we'd really rather not giving it to, to the government officials. And he said, well, I know the church is gonna build some housing. How about partnering with them? So, and their attorney contacted me and said, this group that's gonna, do this development in the city of Napa wants to contribute their housing number, whatever the city requires them to do. They want to contribute that to your project. I said, thank you very much. God is great. What do you say to that? It's like it falls in your lap. Okay, I'll take it. We haven't negotiated all that yet. We've still got a long way to go, but it's an awful nice thing to have. If you've had those relationships, they know kind of where you're headed, and they can begin to think about what they know and who they can, you begin to get some of that influx in, and it helps.
Yeah. Okay.
Is this helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We've
Yeah.
been thinking about this for a while, and every time we hear your experience with the new dimensions to our thoughts appear.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, this thing of not asking for proposals, that's one example that's here, but much more than that too. And I should have taken notes when Jeanette asked for somebody to do that, but we've got it recorded, so we'll be getting the notes.
well, and hey, I'm not going anywhere. And
Okay.
Jeanette and all of you, please don't hesitate to contact me if there's a question you have or some way you think I can help. I'm doing this because I love the church. I love the fact that, we can come together and do something that is going to be incredible for the community that's going to live there.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to change some people's lives. And I said it earlier, I think if you build it, they will come. I think if we create the kind of opportunities that we're talking about here for ministry and for relationship, folks in the community begin to say, hey, I want to be a part of that. I
Yeah.
see what's going on over there. And, I think that's how we keep the doors open at First United Methodist in Napa.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we have greatly enjoyed this conversation. Some of the things that you have lifted up are things we're doing, and so that gives us confidence that we're headed in the right direction. And like Charles is saying, other things are just like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Let's look into that. Let's check that out. So that's really lovely. Mary Lee, I want to ask you, how many years have you been pastoring there in Napa?
Excuse me, yesterday was the beginning of my 5th year.
Okay, thank you. All right,
Yeah,
do we
we're
have
great.
other questions before we say goodnight?
Well, Jeanette, I have one for you, and then I see
Yeah.
Jen has one. When we talked on the phone, you talked about kind of your understanding of the financing of some of these deals was that, the money really comes up front and is available and gets back to the discussion we were having earlier about, do we hope to benefit economically from this project? And like I said, I haven't, in the RFQ, I think it's mentioned, but I haven't made that front and center as the reason for what we're doing. We're doing this for other reasons, right? But like I've said, and I was talking to Mary Lee earlier today, selfishly, I would kind of like to, for us to be able to see our budget benefit from revenue like this. And would you talk a little bit more about your understanding of kind of how these projects are financed? And because I'm not sure that Mary Lee and Ken and maybe our transformation team has that full understanding either.
Okay, so I'm not the expert on this topic necessarily, but some of the groups we've been working with have talked about using tax credits and how they leverage tax credits. And so they build their budget based in part on how much they're leasing the land for, and that's built into, and so they don't consider their project funded until they've covered the amount of the land lease. So if your land lease is $1 a year, $50, you know, they can toss that into the plate. But if it's, you know, a significant amount, something that's perhaps maybe you might feel good saying, oh, it's below what, you know, you would charge developers for a for-profit situation, but at the same time, it's a significant amount to a church budget, then they will look at that and they will build that into their budget. And so they'll just keep working at building the tax credits until they reach that amount. And then when you sign the papers, they pay that out up front. Some of them will say, we're going to pay you, say they're going to pay you $2,000 a month for 55 years. You do out the math, and then they say, well, we'll pay that all up front to you at 80% of cost, sort of thing, so that you then suddenly get, you know, millions of dollars chunked into your stuff. And then you need to look at the book of discipline and then also negotiate. We've been talking with Peter Morris about this, about how to make that, because the book of discipline essentially says it all needs to go towards capital maintenance, but a lot of us want it to go for budget as well, right? And so you need to have some conversations about how that can work out. We have not had those conversations fully because we're not at that point yet.
Yeah.
One of the ideas that I discussed with Peter in an offline situation, but was the idea that that one could say, we would like 50% of that up front, and then we would like monthly, so that they don't pay you a huge amount every month, because part of the way they keep their rents low is by paying all the expenses up front for the property. And then they don't have to charge as much on the rent just to keep ends meet. But if you had a low amount, but for a church, still a nice amount that came in monthly rental income then, or lease income that comes in monthly, can go towards the general budget. It's when you get the big chunks that the book of discipline is saying those big chunks go for capital. So Peter had indicated there might be a little wiggle room on that, but I haven't explored that fully. I just know that he did specifically say when it comes in monthly, that can go for the general budget. So there's options in there, but you can have a nice amount for your to have set aside to maintain the properties that you are keeping for your own use. And you can also figure out ways to do it so that you can, support underwrite the ministry aspects as well. So
Yeah,
just have to explore all the options.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to hear you're talking with Peter. He's a wealth of information.
Yes,
And,
he is.
and the feedback we've gotten thus far has been spot on. So
Yes, very good.
good partner.
Yes. Okay, Sam, you had a question?
Just a general curiosity question. How often does your church council meet? Regularly?
Monthly, we have
monthly.
monthly meetings.
Thank you.
And board of trustees as well. Right. The other thing that I think, all of our lives changed significantly. We're able to have this meeting via Zoom, right? Because we've all become adept as a result of COVID at meeting like this. So there's opportunities as well to, bring people together, kind of, if we needed to bring people together in a way that, to receive some feedback on something or to get some authorization for something, we certainly have this ability to, call a Zoom meeting and have people participate that way.
Thank you.
I'd like to try and figure out the positives in any situation, and it was tough during COVID to figure out what was actually positive.
Yeah.
Took away from that. I think one of the things is our ability to do this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Nice to see you, Jeanette. Nice to meet you all.
Mary, would you
Thank you.
like for prayer for us as we begin to go out for the evening?
Yeah, I'd be glad to.
Thank you.
God, you are amazing, and you surprise and delight us at every turn. We are grateful to be together to share ideas, to share what we know and what we need to know. And we trust that you are leading us into the future, and we accept this as a holy risk, Lord. And we thank you that you walk with us, and we thank you for the encouragement of everyone that is working with us, helping us. And we especially thank you for people who have way more knowledge than we do. So thank you, God, for this time together. Thank you for our relationship as United Methodist siblings. And we ask your blessing on us and on your church on earth. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night all, thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.